Hey folks, welcome to session 5, the final session for creating a book cover. You've obviously created your book cover, but today's session is going to be something a little bit different, a little bit of an added extra. As usual, it's me, Charlie, the illustrator, here to take you through the whole thing. Let's do a quick recap of how far we've come in this project. Session 1, we researched, we looked at our creative voice, and we generated some glorious ideas. In session 2, we expanded those ideas and created thumbnails for them whilst looking in depth at composition. In session 3, we developed that line work, used loads of reference really beautifully, and explored our materials. And last time in session 4, we did colour, working with our text, and creating that final book cover. Like I said, today's session, session 5, is going to be a little bit different. We're going to do an introduction into the creative industry. So this is how to start your career, how to build your portfolio and get ready for uni, and how to use social media. This is really, really useful for those who may be year 11 or above, or if you're below that and you're just keen, that's amazing. This is going to be useful for folks who are considering a creative career. Just like all the other sessions, we are still going to have some creative activities in here. So make sure you've got the basics. Today we're going to need pens or pencils to draw with and at least one piece of A4 or A3 paper. As today is a little bit different, I've broken it down into sections to make it a little bit more digestible and easier to take on board. So here's what we're going to be covering today. First of all is we're going to look at a day in the life of an illustrator, which is something that I found really useful when I was in your position. Next is how I personally got to this point that I'm at, how you can show off your work, so promoting your work, because that's a huge part of my job. Creative business essentials, so knowledge that will make it so useful for you moving forward in a creative career. Preparing yourself for university, if that's what you want to aim for. And lastly, some challenges that I faced and how I overcame them. First of all, is a day in the life of a full-time illustrator, specifically me, this illustrator, because everybody's experience is different, so I can only tell you what mine is like. Going into this career, I knew I was going to have to do an awful lot to build this business, but I didn't realise quite how many roles I needed to fill. So here's the sort of roles that I fill as a self-employed person, as someone who runs their own business. I do the drawing part of it, but I also have to manage my finances, promote my work, research it all, run my social media. There's a lot involved that isn't just drawing. And I used to think that my day would look like this, that I would get up and I would live in my Instagram dream life, I would have my very pretty coffee and everything would be wonderful and I'd be productive and creative all day. And then I go to sleep. It'd be easy. But really, it looks a little bit more like this. So it's a bit of a squiggly mess. And remember when we were looking at idea generation and the difference between what we think it could be and what it actually looks like? That is very similar to a day in the life of an illustrator. And that goes for most things in creative industries or with creative practice, is our path isn't linear necessarily. And that's what makes it creative. Because there's no right or wrong answer, we have to explore lots of different options. And in the interest of honesty as well, because that's what I want to get across to you today, is an honest opinion and view of what my creative career and your potential creative career could look like, sometimes my day looks like this. It's important to acknowledge that days like this will happen, and if you feel like you can't do the creative work, you can't do the drawing, and you can feel a bit of a burnout brewing, which is when you completely run out of energy, that's when my creative day is a day that I take off. But whilst my days can look very different, some are squiggly, some are linear, some are days that I take off, these are the key things that I try and get done during the week. I will do my social media maintenance, which is promoting my work. I will do my targeted personal work, which is personal work that I will do in order to grab the attention of certain clients. I will obviously have to do my client work, so this is work that someone is paying me to do. I will take in lots of input. Remember when we were looking at research and reference and getting input into your brain in the form of inspiration. I will have to be aware of other people's projects, so knowing what's happening in my industry. I'll try to leave my comfort zone at least 1 or 2 times during the week by trying out drawing techniques or methods or materials I'm not familiar with. Maintaining my workspace, which sounds quite boring, but making sure that your desk is fairly tidy makes a huge difference. And of course, downtime, so time when I'm not working. I'm going to go over a few essentials for my work as well, because I know when I was in your position, I knew illustrators did drawing for a job, but I didn't quite know what they used or what was important or what I needed to look at getting. So here's some essentials that I need during my workday. I will need my sketchbooks, and I used to have a very complicated relationship with sketchbooks in that I felt so much pressure to make them pretty, but then I realised pretty ones are art books, not sketchbooks. So since I started buying cheap, small sketchbooks and allowing myself to make them messy, they've become really valuable to my work. Another thing is my tech, and I just want to put a disclaimer on this to say I know there is a financial barrier to having tech, and it's taken me many years to build up this collection of technology. So if you don't have access to any of these, that's still fine, but I just want to give you a view into how I work. So these are the things that I use primarily. I do a lot of my work on my iPad. My camera as well is very useful for me. That's what I'm filming on right now. And my software is Affinity Photo and Affinity Publisher, which is an awful lot cheaper and more accessible than things like Photoshop and InDesign. I love my picture books. I have so many picture books, and that can be kids' books, graphic novels, natural history books, photograph books, anything at all. I have tons of them, and they're all right next to my desk. The one I use most often is this one in the picture here called Wonder by Beatrice Blue, one of my favourite illustrators of all time. I refer to these books whenever I need input, so whenever I'm running low on creative output, I will look through my picture books and recharge myself. Next is my comfy workspace, which is what we're in right now. Making this space comfortable for me and feeling cozy and welcoming and able to work in is important. So whatever your workspace looks like, make it as comfortable for you as possible. Next is lists. I swear by lists. I write so many. Remember when we were going over how to record our ideas? Lists and bullet points are my whole jam. So I have tons of lists because I've got a very chaotic brain. And by breaking down what I need to do and practice and things that I need to look at into lists, it makes it an awful lot easier. And lastly is some good music. I love soul music. I love people like Aretha Franklin and happy, peppy music, but whatever sounds or other noises you want in your space, make sure you pop that on. It doesn't have to be things other people are listening to, whatever it is you're comfortable with. Next, I want to go over some honest truths about my workday. And I say all these things not to put you off from having a creative career, but just to be honest with you, because if you go into this whole process, this career, expecting an Instagram dream career, you're going to not only get disappointed, but you're going to blame yourself for it not being Instagrammy, for it not being perfect. So I just wanted to tell you these things so you know that every creative person, no matter how established, experiences these things. First of all is you will not feel like being creative every single day. Sometimes I will hear people say, artists say, draw every day without fail, always draw every day. There is no better way to get you to resent creative work than making it into a chore. So don't feel obliged to draw every day, that'll drive you nuts. Let yourself have days where you're not being creative. Another one is your style of working and your style of creating work will change and evolve constantly. Mine has changed so much just in the last year. Looking back at my work from a year ago, I've evolved my creative practice a lot. And it's okay for things to change. You don't need to be set in your style or your creative voice like concrete. Personal work is just as important as other work. So whether it's client work or work from education like school or uni, your personal work alongside that is just as important. And when it comes to doing work for your job, that's just as relevant on things like your website and showcasing to people. And an important thing to mention as well, because all of us are on social media is not a true representation of other people's careers. That's important to remind yourself of every time you see an artist or a creative person on Instagram or Twitter shouting about all their amazing projects. Yes, they're doing those projects, but they're not going to talk about the bad days or the things that have set them back. Remember, social media is curated and it is not a reflection of reality. Next, I want to talk about how I got to this point. So all the way from the very beginning up to where I am now. So I showed you this little timeline right at the beginning of these sessions, but just to remind you, I started from drawing obsessively, then focusing my education on creative subjects and art and visual creative things, graduated in 2014 from my degree. From graduation, I had many part-time jobs, dealt with small clients, did a lot of research, left my comfort zone as much as I could, and now this is my full-time job. So I just wanted to break down those steps a little bit for you and explain a little bit further how those steps influenced where I am today. First of all, I want to look at GCSEs. When I was doing my GCSEs, I was so stubborn, I was so stuck in my ways, and I wouldn't leave my comfort zone, and I must have driven my teacher mad. Won't draw hands, won't draw faces, won't use reference. No. That must have been so irritating, and I wish I would have left my comfort zone earlier. But it was only during my A-levels that I started to inch out of it a little bit. I tiptoed outside my comfort zone a tiny bit, explored things a little bit braver, and then I got to my foundation. And that is where my comfort zone got exploded. And I mentioned earlier at the beginning of all these sessions, but just to reiterate, in case you're not familiar with what a foundation course is, it's a year-long course that you can do before you go to university, where you get to spend a week exploring every single visual creative thing you can think of. So I did a week in photography, a week in fashion, a week in graphic design and 3D and fine art. You try it all and then you specialise, which helped me because when I was doing A-levels and GCSEs, I just knew that I loved to draw, but I didn't know how that translated into a career. So it was during my foundation diploma that I realised that illustration was perfect for me. But why did I realise illustration was perfect for me? Why did I really like the sound of this amazing subject that I didn't even realise I could do a degree in? For me, it's because it combines the textural, messy, creative parts of, say, fine art and the design commercial elements of something like graphic design. With those two combined into illustration, it was the perfect route for me to go down in order to stay creative and draw loads and explore colour, but also see my work on things like book covers and inside books and on posters. Illustration as a subject is so broad as well. So even when I got to my degree, I didn't know that I wanted to be in publishing, but there were so many options available to me that I could explore. There is, of course, publishing, but then there's advertising and editorial, which is for things like magazines and newspapers. And there's concept art for games and TV. And there's surface design, which is pattern and textile design. There were loads of different routes available to me. I just chose to go down publishing. Then, after foundation, it was over to university. And this is where I tried as many different things as I could. I did try to leave my comfort zone, but my first 2 years were a real slog because I wasn't being authentic to myself. I think I mentioned earlier on in these sessions, my first 2 years of my degree, I didn't like any of my work, but it's because I realised I wasn't producing work that was true to me. I was trying to impress my tutors. And it was only in my 3rd year when I stepped away from that I really loved the work I was doing. And after graduation, I gradually worked on tipping those scales and doing more illustration work alongside my part-time job, and eventually able to tip the scales fully and find myself where I am today. There were a lot of things that I needed to do to find myself in this position. Here are just a few of them and the key ones that I can think of that would be most useful to you now. First of all is having an online presence, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in a minute. Next is a very, very simple one, but one that gets undervalued a lot, and that's just being polite and being professional. When you're communicating with clients or with potential clients or just other creative people, just be nice. Practicing my skills, obviously a very important one, and leaving my comfort zone loads. Now I want to talk about a very important part of my job and something that takes up a fair amount of my time, and that's showing off my work. Because it's all well and good having a beautiful portfolio full of amazing work, but if no one knows you do it, then you're not going to get much work from it. We're only going to be covering two main areas today, and that's your website and social media, because those are the key areas that you're going to be using to promote your work. First of all is your portfolio, and you may not need to be building your website just yet. You may not be in a position to do that at the moment, and that's okay, but it is really useful to have this knowledge and this information ready to go for when you get to university or further on in your creative career and you do need to start building one. Your portfolio is the headquarters for your work. This is where a curated selection of your best work lives. And when I say curated, I mean it is just your best work. It isn't works in progress, it isn't sketches, it is just the things that you want to show off. You don't have to put everything in there. It's what potential clients and people who are interested in your work will look for. They'll want to see that you've got a professional website. It brings all your social media links and all the information about you together in one place, and it does not have to be expensive. You can use something like Squarespace or Cargo Collective to build your website, and they're really not that expensive. When it comes to the design of your portfolio, there are some things to bear in mind whilst you're building it visually. Because remember, you're presenting yourself as a visual professional, so the visuals that they are presented with need to be top notch. So bear in mind this checklist whilst you are going through your website. The design has to be really clean, not messy, not full of patterns. Try to have just a pale or a white background. Generally, true black backgrounds aren't that popular at the moment because they're seen as a little bit archaic and a bit too retro. So just go white or a pale colour like Samantha Mash's example here. Make sure your name or your brand name and your branding is clearly visible. Make sure your work is immediately in front of them, so no landing page, which is what it's called when you go to a website and it says something like, "Welcome to my website," and you have to click through to see it. You don't need any of that. The second they click on your website, they need to see your work immediately. Make sure you have a contact page, the second most important page after your portfolio. You need to make sure people can get in touch with you. Just have your email address in there. You don't want to use a contact form or anything like that, just an email address. Be sure to have your own domain name as soon as you can. For example, mine is just charlivince.com. Try to avoid having things like .squarespace or .tumblr or .something else. Again, I know there's a financial barrier to this, but the sooner you can do it, the better. And make sure you test it. Send it to your grandparent or someone who's not very good with technology and get them to try every link, have a look at everything and make sure they can navigate it easily. And responsive just means it works well on a phone and a tablet as well as on a computer. So make sure you test it on lots of different things. That's the basics for a portfolio. Now we're going to have a look at social media because that's what will bring people to your portfolio. Because it's hard for someone to stumble across a website, but very easy for someone to stumble across your profile on social media. And we're only going to look at two today. We're going to look at Instagram and Twitter. First up is Instagram, which I'm sure nearly all of you are familiar with. When you are using it, I'm sure you use it for personal things now, but when you are starting to use it for creative reasons, to be a business page, make sure that you're aware of how to conduct yourself on there. So balance this approachability with professionalism, which means by all means have a voice on there, be a human being, have a personality, but make sure you're also being really professional. Do make the most of using things like stories and reels. I used to be really adverse to using stories because I'm a fuddy-duddy and I hate things like Snapchat. But if you try using stories, the second I tried using it, the engagement and the traffic to my page tripled. So make the most out of things like stories and reels. Keep your content dynamic, which means don't just post final pieces. This is where you can post things like sketches and close-ups and videos and other content to keep people interested. Follow people who you would want to give you work, as well as the people who you really admire. So if you're like me and you'd love to work with certain publishers, follow them on social media as well as just other illustrators. And one of the best ways to increase engagement on your page and to increase your follower count is to engage with others. So talking to other people, commenting on their work, asking them questions, answering their questions, engage with them. Next is we're going to have a quick look at Twitter. And Twitter is more underutilized than Instagram because Instagram's very visual and very pretty, but Twitter can be really, really valuable as well. It's again important to balance approachability and professionalism. It's a really good place to engage with creative communities, so this is a good place to talk to people because Twitter is much more conversational, whereas Instagram is more of a showcase of your work. Twitter's a good place as well to take part in certain hashtags like Portfolio Day or Visible Women or Inktober. And again, just to stress, important to follow the people who could give you the work, especially on Twitter, because a lot of commissioners and agencies and art directors will use particularly those hashtags to find interesting new talent. Some last things to leave you with social media and some really important things to remember as you go into using social media creatively. Take good care of the current followers that you have in order to grow this reach. One of the main questions that I get about social media is how do I get more followers? How do I get more engagement, more likes, more people? And the best way to do that is to take care of the people you have at the moment and your reach will grow organically. Don't overshare on social media or be overtly negative. Again, by all means, humanize this online presence that you have, so be yourself, have a personality, but don't turn it into a Dear Diary situation. If need be, have a separate profile for your personal tweets, Instagram posts, and then another one for your creative ones. That's what I do. Schedule your social media time. So for business purposes, for promoting your work, schedule it because you really don't want it to take over. Some people can be daunted by how much work you have to put into maintaining your social media for a business, but if you schedule it, it's not that bad. And make sure you are posting consistently, but not constantly. So consistently just means you're not leaving it for a month to have nothing on it, but you are also not feeling obligated to post every 5 minutes because that'll drive you mad. Now we're going to do a quick little activity. So we talked an awful lot about our online presence, and there are 2 key things that you need for an online presence: a profile picture and a bio. So we're going to create one of each. First of all, we're going to draw ourselves a profile picture. You have got 5 minutes and you can use any materials you want in order to do this. All I want you to do is draw a self-portrait you could use as a profile picture. And you can do this in any way that you want. It can literally just be your face, or it can be like mine here, which has got little plants and my dog in it. Make it your own. Make it communicative of who you are. I know 5 minutes isn't a long time, but I thought it would be quite a fun thing to do. So, ready? 5 minutes, draw yourself a profile picture. Now that we have a beautiful new profile picture, we need a little artist's bio, because every good website, every social media account has an About Me section or a little bio section, and sometimes they can be quite hard to write, so we're going to practice that. We're going to spend another 5 minutes creating a little bio for ourselves. And when you go into writing this, there are some things that you can think about mentioning. First of all, who you are, obviously. Mine normally starts with, hey, I'm Charli. Next is what you love doing creatively. So mine will be, I love working with stories and bright colours. After that, you could maybe think about talking about the favourite projects that you've worked on in the past. What have you really enjoyed doing? Then what you do in your spare time, because remember, you're a human being. And you could always mention what you want to do more of in the future. Whether that's uni, career, particular projects you'd love to work on, particular people you'd love to work with. Think about all of these things when you're writing this, and don't do more than one small paragraph because you're not writing your whole history. This isn't a CV. This is just a little bio. All right, you ready? Another 5 minutes. Write your bio. I'll leave these little suggestions up as well. Go. Now that we've covered our online presence and we've got a new profile picture and a bio pre-written, I'm going to go over some creative business essentials, which are just little nuggets of knowledge that will make going into a creative career much easier and you'll feel much more prepared to be dealing with it. First of all is understanding what copyright is. And I know that can sound quite dull, and you know what the word copyright is. You've seen that little C in a circle before. But it's so important for creatives to understand what it is, because copyright is how we earn money. Copyright is basically the right to copy, so the right to reproduce something. Your copyright is automatic to all of your work. The second you finish a drawing, whether you're a professional, at uni, a student, whatever it is, the second you finish a drawing, it is automatically copyrighted to you. You don't need to register it, you don't need to sign it, you don't need to put the little C symbol on it, it's immediate. Your copyright lasts your whole life plus 70 years after you die. And when that time elapses, it falls into what's called public domain, which is where a lot of old books and old photographs and old music lives. There is no copyright in an idea or a style. This is important to remember. You can't copyright an idea or a style. It's not possible. It wouldn't be possible to police it. It wouldn't be possible to maintain it. You can only copyright the image that you've created. So that's the basics of what copyright is. And the way I and many other illustrators earn money is by lending out that copyright in the form of something called a license. And that's not the same thing as a license for a car. Like, I haven't got a little card that says license to draw. But what it is it's a series of restrictions and options for the client as to how they can use the work. To give you a brief explanation of what a license looks like, it could be something like this. You may use this illustration for these 3 things. So a license is made up of where they can use the work, for how long, and on what. As an example, it could be you may use the illustration worldwide for 3 years on print book and ebook covers. That is all a license is. And when I describe that, when I explain that to the client, that just goes in the contract that I've got pre-written. I don't need to write a new contract for every person. I just fill that bit in, explaining what the license is, and then it's done. And that's how I earn my money. If the license changes, the fee will change. So if they wanted to use it for longer than 5 years, I could charge them more. That's how illustrators earn their money, through lending out our copyright. When you do start working as a professional artist, sometimes that first bit of client contact can be terrifying. It can be really scary and exciting to get an email or a bit of contact from someone saying, "Hi, I'd like to commission some illustrations from you." Then you kind of don't know what to do. I know when I was in that position, I was like, okay, this is exciting. Someone wants to pay me for my work. What do I do? So some things to bear in mind when you are doing this first bit of contact. Be polite with them, but don't be hyper formal. No dear sir, madam, none of that. Spell their name right. I know that sounds small, but it makes a huge difference. Do look up who they are as well. It's okay to Google their name and see if they work for a really big company. Remember that you have a valuable service. They're not doing you a favor by asking you to do this. You have a skill that they don't, and always remember that. And when you are responding to this, what is likely to be an email, please do format it professionally. And when I say that, I mean not like this. This is not a good email to send to someone for a number of reasons. The name of this person is spelt wrong. There's no capitalization or paragraphs in here. They haven't put a subject on the email. There's no signature. There's no sign off saying kind regards or thank you. And it's low confidence. If you look at how it's worded, they've tried to say how they're not very good. And that's not a good thing to do. That will not give them confidence in your skills or your professionalism. This is the kind of email you want to write back. It's spelt correctly, it's polite and professional. There's paragraphs and formatting. I've asked them questions, so I've kept the conversation going. There's a signature with my branding on it, and there's a relevant subject line. This is the right way to respond. Those are a few foundation nuggets of knowledge for going forward into a creative career. There's obviously an awful lot more, but at the stage you're at now, we don't need to spend hours and hours talking about contracts and invoices. Just those things, the copyright, what a license is, and how to communicate with someone is all you need to know at the moment. For now, let's have a little look at preparing for uni if this is something that you're considering doing. It's important to know how to get ready for these interviews and get your portfolio set. First of all is that all-important portfolio. This is how they're going to get an idea of what you do. And a portfolio is, in short, a curated compilation of your creative work that demonstrates your skill, your ability to interpret things artistically, and that you have an eye for unique and impactful aesthetics. That's all it is doing, is showing your skills and your abilities and your ideas. It needs to demonstrate your technical skill and your creative interpretation so that you are good at using this material and you are good at using it to communicate something interesting. It also needs to show that you have an ability and a willingness to leave your comfort zone. So if you're really familiar and happy using graphite, you also need to show in there that you're willing to try textiles or printing or oil paints. And lastly, and most importantly, it needs to show that you care about the subject. So that's not in a, oh my God, this is my life and if I can't do it, I will be lost forever. This is just a thing to say, shows that you care about it and you want to explore it and you want to do more of it. Let's have a quick look at the key things that need to be in your portfolio or that have been recommended over the years to me and many others to put in there. First of all is something we've mentioned 4 billion times over this project, is exploration. So that links nicely to leaving your comfort zone, trying different methods, mediums, materials, projects. Next is it's your best and your favourite work. It's not a dump for everything you've ever done. Just like when we were talking about what to put on your website, your portfolio should just have your best and your favourite work. And make sure there's a balance of polished work and development work. Some unis are different in how much development work they want to see, but all will want to see some degree of how you got to a final piece. And next, it's very important to look at their guidelines. Every uni, every institution is different in what they want to see. So make sure that you look up what guidelines they have and you're giving them exactly what they want, not what you think they want. Now we're going to go over a few quick do's and don'ts for this interview stage and for presenting yourself and your work. First of all is do show a variety of work. Remember how much I've stressed exploration and experimentation. Show this variety. Show that you're willing to try different things. Next is don't use low resolution images. If you are printing this work, and most likely you're going to be sending it digitally, make sure they look nice and crisp and it's not a low resolution, badly photographed image. Next is do research the institution. So look up who you're going to be applying for. Look at their portfolio requirements, look up the tutors' names as well, which can be really useful. Understand who they are, understand what they're looking for, and look up the basic information about this university. You don't need to memorize their entire Wikipedia page, but know what it is that they specialize in and that they're proud of. Do not be self-deprecating. Remember that terrible email that we looked at a second ago? It had some self-deprecating, low-confidence tone in it. And we want to avoid that, especially at interview stage. So don't go in saying, I don't really like this piece. Oh, I'm not that good really. I'm just learning. I'm not this, I'm only that. Don't go in immediately trying to lower their expectations. Go in with confidence and the ability to project what it is you do and why you love it. And the last one is do prepare answers for things. Be aware of the kinds of questions they're going to ask you. Don't just go in with the hope of winging it. Here are a few of the key questions that I was asked and that guaranteed you'll be asked at least one of during interview stage. First of all is things like, what was the project? Then what did you learn? Who or what might have influenced this piece? How did it go? What techniques did you use and what would you do differently next time? There are obviously loads more different questions they could ask you, but these are the main ones that I am familiar with and that I know they will ask you at least one of. Finally, I'm going to go over some challenges that I have faced personally in my career and that I know are very common challenges for people to face in any creative career, and how I have overcome them. First of all is one that nearly all of us worry about, and I still worry about, is earning money steadily. This is the roadblock that people often meet when they're trying to argue their point that a creative career is viable. Some people still find it like, oh, you'll never earn money as an artist, and that's nonsense. But we need to understand how to earn this money steadily, because it's not as simple as just getting a job with a company. We're building this business ourselves. One very important thing to make sure you do is learn how this industry works. Just by listening to me today and understanding what copyright is and learning what a license is, you've already made a huge first step. But learning how it works, like how to be professional and communicate with people well, figuring out whether you want to be what I am, which is called freelance, or whether you'd like to be in-house, which means you work for someone in particular, work out which one of those you're more comfortable with. Think about what you need and when you need it. So do you need a website yet? When would you need one? And knowing your rights. So understanding copyright and things like that are all so important to building a sustainable career. Here are a few things that I have practically done to make sure that my income remains steady and sustainable. I've got multiple streams of income, so I don't just rely on doing book work. I will also do things like talks and workshops. Hello. Or selling merchandise online, doing smaller commissions for smaller independent clients. Those all help towards filling up my income. Also important to remember, there's no shame or unprofessionalism in having a part-time job. Everyone's financial situation is different. Remembering everyone moves at different speeds is important. So if your situation requires you to have a part-time job, whether it's relevant to creative work or not, that's completely fine. You're no less of an illustrator, you're no less of a professional. You just need to have that to keep everything running, and that's fine. And lastly, most importantly, I want to stress, it is possible. I know when I was in your position, I thought being full-time to do art and get paid for it was a wild dream that could never happen. But it is, of course, possible. If 10-year-old me knew that I was getting paid to draw dinosaurs all day, she'd lose her mind. She'd be so happy about that. But it is, of course, possible. Next is imposter syndrome, and you may be familiar with this term, and you may not. So to give you a little definition as to what it is, it was first coined by these two fantastic doctors in an article they wrote called The Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women. It was an article specifically about high achieving women of colour who were feeling fraudulent and were feeling like they didn't deserve the success that they had. And they feel like they're not a real illustrator and not a real scientist, something like that. They didn't feel like they fit in. This is very, very common with creative industries. It's not an actual syndrome. It's not an actual disease or anything that's dangerous or spooky. It's a feeling you get. Feeling as if your successes are a result of luck or fraud rather than skill or ability. I know a lot of creative people experience this because, as I said before, there's no right or wrong answer in our careers. So we can feel like we're stuck in this grey area and we'll never fully know if that's the right place to be. Some things that will cause it or add to it are things like social media and isolation from communication. I know we obviously can't go out and see loads of people at the moment, but just isolating ourselves from communicating can make it worse. Toxic work rhetorics, meaning things like when people say all-nighter, when people say that you have to be working and have to be tired and have to be this all the time. That's all nonsense. Getting exhausted and putting pressure on yourself whilst you're exhausted can make it worse too. Some things that you can do to battle it would be finding creative peers especially. That's one main thing that's really helped me. This is a photo from my first event that I ran for Norwich AOI. It was a sold out event, it was amazing. It was obviously before lockdown and we were able to meet up in person. And when I say find creative peers, I don't mean you have to be in the same room as them. Just be communicating with them. You can find creative peers online. Remember how I said Twitter is an excellent vehicle for finding creative communities. It's also important to remember that hard work and achievements and intellect are not the cure or the vaccine for imposter syndrome, which just means when you feel like you're not a real artist or not a real this, not a real that, you're an imposter, it's not because you're not working hard enough. It's not because you're not smart enough or you've not achieved enough. Imposter syndrome is not based on reality, so don't listen to it. And lastly, for another challenge that I've overcome is finding my niche. So finding that little part of illustration that I want to be in. The best thing I could do in order to defeat that was research it. So I wanted to research which industry I was interested in, and that led me to publishing. What sort of trends are out there at the moment, and that's not in order to copy them, just to be aware of them. What industries will look for? So if I wanted to be in publishing, I need to make sure I have things like book covers and sequential illustration in my portfolio. And next is the styles and creative voices that I love. Remember when we looked at taking apart other artwork into traits and figuring out what traits I'd want to put in my work. In terms of finding the niche and breaking it down, it took time, and it will take time for you as well. For me, for example, I broke it down into realizing I like art, okay. I like illustration, even better. Eventually, I realized I like publishing. And even publishing can get broken down further into things like, do I want to be in young adult or adult publishing or kids literature? And those can be broken down even more. That's how you find your niche, and it takes a while, so don't panic about suddenly deciding now that you want to work for adult graphic novels, or you want to do young adult cover design, or kids literature board books. You can just know right now that you like art. Then you can narrow it down afterwards, but that's how I found my niche. A really important part of finding this niche and making sure it's the right niche and right part of the industry for you is, of course, like I've said before, being really honest with yourself and being honest about where you find the most inspiration and enjoyment. Not because you feel like you need to go into something because you feel obliged to or because other people are doing it. Be really honest with yourself. Try using that Creative Voices worksheet again that you had earlier and figure out where you genuinely enjoy being. You have a to-do list today as well. It's only got one thing on it and it's only a little thing, but you have got a Creative Careers worksheet, and this is a useful way to answer some of the questions that we asked today. So where is your niche? What is it you enjoy? What is it you want to do? They're very simple questions, but I want you to be as honest as possible when you answer them. I'm also going to leave you with this fantastic group of resources. So look up these things if you're interested in a career in either illustration or design or animation or anything at all that's visually creative. These resources are going to be fab. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen for a sec in case you want to take a picture of it or write these down, but I really recommend every one of these. And that's all that I've got for you today and for this whole project. Thank you so much for taking part in this project. I hope you found it fun and useful, and that you've got a beautiful book cover and loads of very weird warm-up drawings, and that today was useful for you as well. Because even if you don't want to go into a creative career, even if you don't know which career you want to go into and it is creative, hopefully some of this knowledge and tons of information that I've thrown at you will be useful. You have a little info sheet for every single session that we did over the last few days. So if you've forgotten something or you want to remind yourself of something, it's all written down there for you. So thank you again. I hope it was fun, and hopefully I will see you again for another project at some point. Have a good one, folks. Bye.